The data stream had been running for 11,422 days. Every signal, every pulse, every ghost echo from the lost colonies filtered through relay station Theta 9 like water through cracks in a dam. Most were noise, cosmic radiation, star death, the universe screaming into the void. Analyst Myra Voss had learned to read the silence between screams. She sat in the circular monitoring chamber, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of stim brew, eyes tracking the spectral display with the patience of someone who had spent 15 years hunting for nothing. The lost ships didn't want to be found. That was the cruel joke of deep space. You could spend a lifetime listening and hear only your own heartbeat reflected back. The Vanguard of Hope had gone silent 113 years ago. 3,000 souls aboard, families, scientists, the greatest terraforming expedition humanity had ever launched. They were supposed to be the bridge to Andromeda's edge. Instead, they became a question mark carved into the dark. The Council of Races had declared them dead 40 years after the last transmission. The budgets got cut. The monitoring stations got reassigned. Only Theta 9 remained, staffed by the stubborn and the grieving. Voss was neither. She was just a woman who refused to accept that 3,000 people could vanish without explanation. The alarm didn't scream. It whispered. A single frequency shift buried in the background radiation, so faint that the automated systems had flagged it as sensor error and moved on, but Voss caught it. Her fingers danced across the control surface, isolating the signal, amplifying it through 7 layers of filtration. The pattern emerged. Not random, not natural, encoded in a cipher so old that most species had forgotten it existed. The emergency broadcast protocol from Earth's early expansion era. The one designed to be recognized by any human anywhere, no matter how far they had strayed. Her heart didn't race, it stopped. Then it started again, harder. She pulled up the historical records, the Vanguard's last known position, the drift calculations, the gravitational anomalies in that sector that made rescue impossible for standard fleets. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Someone was still alive. Voss keyed the Council's emergency channel. The response was immediate and dismissive. A Xanthian administrator with too many medals and too little imagination told her that the signal was probably a reflection from a passing comet, that the Vanguard had been written off, that reopening the case would require approval from 12 committees and a budget that didn't exist. She listened to him talk for 3 minutes. Then she disconnected the call and sent the data to someone who would listen. Commander Elias Vance had been retired for 8 years. He lived on a research outpost near Jupiter's orbit, writing memoirs that no one read and waiting for a death that refused to arrive. He had captained the last search mission for the Vanguard 50 years ago. He had failed. The guilt had aged him faster than the decades. When Voss's message arrived, he read it once. Then he read it again. Then he activated an emergency beacon that hadn't been used since the War of Unification. Morwen was 132 years old, and she was the last person aboard the Vanguard of Hope who remembered Earth. The others had been born in the dark. They knew the ship's corridors as their ancestors had known forests. They understood the hum of the failing reactors better than the sound of wind or rain. Their world was measured in bulkheads and life support cycles, not days and nights. But Morwen remembered. She remembered the weight of gravity, the smell of soil after a storm, the sound of her mother's voice, and she remembered men. The stories had become legends, then myths, then warnings. The young tribes whispered that men were monsters who had tried to destroy the ship, that their madness had poisoned the airlocks and corrupted the navigation systems, that the women had been forced to kill them to survive. Morwen never corrected them. Not because the stories were wrong, because the truth was worse. The men hadn't gone mad from isolation. They had been driven mad by something else, something that had infiltrated the ship during their last planetary survey, a spore, a parasite, a consciousness that fed on aggression and turned protectors into predators. The women had done what they had to do, but the cost had been higher than anyone knew. Every child born in the 113 years since had been female. The parasite had rewritten something fundamental in their biology, not killing them, just ensuring that no male chromosomes could survive gestation. The human race aboard the Vanguard had become a single-gender species. Morwen walked through the hydroponics bay, her joints aching with every step. The younger women parted around her like water around a stone. They wore their hair in complex braids, their faces marked with tribal patterns that meant nothing to her. 3 tribes had emerged in the last 50 years. The keepers, who wanted to preserve the old ways, the seekers, who still hoped for rescue, and the reclaimers, who believed that men had never existed at all. The reclaimers were the most dangerous. Their leader, a woman named Sen, had rewritten the ship's historical archives. She had replaced every image of male crew members with blank spaces. She had taught her followers that the stories of men were fairy tales designed to keep women afraid. Morwen had watched Sen execute 3 keepers for refusing to accept the new doctrine. The ship's corridors had become battlegrounds, not with weapons. They had run out of bullets decades ago, but with silence, with exclusion, with the slow, deliberate erasure of anyone who disagreed. Morwen stopped at the observation port. Outside, the stars remained unchanged, endless, indifferent. She had prayed for rescue for 90 years. Then she had prayed for death for 20. Now she didn't pray at all. She just waited. The proximity alarm triggered. Sen's voice crackled through the ship's intercom, sharp with suspicion. Unauthorized vessel, 8,000 kilometers and closing. Signal matches no known council frequency. The hydroponics bay went still. 3 generations of women looked at each other with expressions Morwen had never seen before. Fear, hope, and something else. Hunger. The ship shuddered as docking clamps engaged. Commander Elias Vance had prepared for a corpse. He had flown search and rescue for 30 years. He had found wreckage. He had found bodies. He had found remains that could only be identified by dental records and hope. But he had never found a ship that had been silent for over a century and then started transmitting again. The Vanguard of Hope hung in the darkness like a fossil preserved in amber. Her hull was scarred by micrometeor impacts. Her external lights had failed decades ago, but her airlock cycled. Her docking clamps extended. Someone inside was still operating the machinery. Vance suited up. His helmet display flickered through 3 diagnostic checks. Oxygen, temperature, radiation, all within acceptable parameters. He checked his sidearm out of habit, then left it in the shuttle's weapons locker. He wasn't here to fight. The airlock opened into a receiving bay that had been converted into something between a temple and a fortress. Candles flickered in the low gravity. Hand-painted murals covered every surface, depicting women in various stages of labor, combat, and worship. There were no images of men. 30 women waited in formation. They wore uniforms that had been patched and repatched so many times that the original fabric was almost invisible. Their faces were lean, hungry, and fiercely intelligent. Their hands rested on tools that had been sharpened into weapons. Vance raised his faceplate. The air smelled of recycled water, fungal protein, and something else. Something metallic, something old. He recognized it from battlefields and disaster sites. The smell of a population that had learned to survive by forgetting how to feel. The woman at the front of the formation stepped forward. She was tall, muscular, and completely bald. A lattice of scars covered her scalp. Her eyes held the cold efficiency of a predator who had never been challenged. "State your purpose," she said. Vance had faced down pirates, plague ships, and diplomatic incidents that had nearly sparked interstellar war. But the weight of 30 stairs, each one carrying 100 years of isolation, pressed against him like gravity. "My name is Commander Elias Vance," he said. "I'm here to take you home." Silence. Then a sound that Vance had never expected to hear. Laughter. It started with the scarred woman, a single, sharp bark of disbelief. Then it spread through the formation like fire through dry grass. Not joyful laughter, the laughter of people who had stopped believing in hope so long ago that the word itself had become a joke. "You're a man," the woman said, "not a question, an accusation." "Yes. We killed the last man who came through that airlock." Vance didn't flinch. "How many of you are there?" The laughter stopped. The temperature in the bay dropped by degrees. The woman's hand tightened around her weapon. 247, she said. All female, all survivors, all waiting for someone to tell us that the last 100 years meant something. Behind her, Vance saw movement in the shadows. Young women, teenagers, children. They peered at him with wide eyes, their faces a mixture of terror and wonder. One of them, no more than 6 years old, took a step forward. Her mother grabbed her arm and pulled her back. The scarred woman leaned close to Vance's face. Her breath smelled of recycled air and determination. "My name is Sen," she whispered. "You have 1 hour to convince me not to space you." The ship's central archive was the only place on the Vanguard that hadn't been touched by the tribes. Morwen led Vance through corridors that twisted and turned like the intestines of a dying animal. The walls were covered in layer after layer of paint, each one representing a different era of the ship's long history. Some of the murals were beautiful, some were disturbing. All of them told the same story. Women alone in the dark. "The men died in the first 30 years, Morwen said. Her voice was thin but steady. "Not all at once, one by one. The accident that damaged our engines also released something from the planet we surveyed, a biological agent. It affected only the males." Vance listened without interrupting. He had learned long ago that survivors needed to tell their stories in their own time. "At first we thought it was a virus, then we thought it was madness, then we realized it was neither." Morwen stopped outside a sealed door. Her fingers trembled as she entered the access code. It was a message. The door opened. Inside, the original ship's logs were preserved in environmental stasis. Screens displayed the faces of the dead, the crew manifest, the final transmissions. Morwen activated the oldest recording. A man appeared. His uniform marked him as the chief medical officer. His face was gaunt. His eyes were hollow, but his voice was steady. "We've identified the pathogen. It's not native to the planet. It's a weapon, designed to target Y chromosomes and amplify aggression until the host becomes a threat to everyone around them. The women are immune. The children are at risk. We've sealed ourselves in the medical bay. Don't let us out." The recording ended. Morwen turned to Vance. "They didn't want to die, but they knew they would kill us if they lived. So they chose 53 men. They turned off the life support in their section and waited for the end." Vance's throat tightened. "That's not madness, that's sacrifice." "Try telling that to Sen." Morwen's eyes glistened. "She was the first child born after the men died. She never knew her father. No one would tell her why he was gone, so she invented her own reason. She decided that the men had been monsters, that we had been weak to let them die, that the future of the Vanguard depended on erasing every memory of them." A sound echoed through the corridor, footsteps, many of them. Vance turned. Sen stood at the far end of the hallway, surrounded by 20 of her reclaimers. Their weapons were raised. Their faces were calm. "You found the old lies," Sen said. "Good, now you can watch us burn them." She raised a torch. The flame flickered in the low gravity, casting strange shadows across her scarred face. Vance stepped between her and the archive door. "You're not burning anything." Sen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You're one man, we're 20 warriors. What exactly do you think you can do?" Vance reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, no larger than his palm. It glowed with a soft blue light. "This is a resonance beacon," he said. "Every human ship within 1,000 light years can detect it, including the Council fleet that's been following me since I left Jupiter." Sen's smile faltered. You have two choices, Vance continued. You can kill me, burn this archive, and spend the rest of your lives hiding from the truth. Or you can let me help you, not because you need a man to save you, because you're human, and humans don't let each other die alone. The corridor fell silent. Sen didn't attack. She also didn't surrender. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She smiled again, a real smile this time, the kind that preceded a trap. You want to help us, she said. Fine, prove it. The reclaimers lowered their weapons. Other women emerged from the shadows, keepers, seekers, and the unaffiliated, the ones who had been waiting for someone to show them a direction. Sen led Vance to the ship's central hub, a circular chamber that had once been the bridge. Now it served as a gathering place for all three tribes. The walls were covered in tribal markings, each one staking a claim to a different piece of the Vanguard's future. In the old days, Sen said, when a man wanted to join a new tribe, he had to prove his worth. 3 trials: strength, wisdom, heart. Those are fairy tales, Morwen said from behind Vance. Ancient Earth rituals, nothing to do with our situation. Everything to do with our situation. Sen's voice hardened. Your council fleet won't take us seriously if we can't even agree on what we are. We've been fighting each other for 50 years. If this man wants to save us, let him show us how to stop fighting. The crowd murmured. The logic was sound, the motive was not. Vance saw it clearly. Sen didn't want unity. She wanted a spectacle. If he failed the trials, she would have proof that men were weak. If he succeeded, she would claim that his success belonged to the reclaimers. Either way, she won. But Vance had spent 50 years feeling guilty about not finding the Vanguard. 50 years of wondering what had happened to the 3,000 souls he had failed to save. He wasn't going to let politics stand in the way of redemption. I'll do it, he said. Morwen grabbed his arm. Her grip was stronger than it looked. You don't understand. The trials aren't metaphorical. Sen will design them to kill you. She'll try. The first trial was announced at dawn, ship's time, which meant nothing because the Vanguard had no dawn, but the women gathered anyway, their faces painted with the colors of their tribes. Strength. Sen pointed to the ship's damaged engine core, a maze of radiation leaks, collapsing catwalks, and failing containment fields. Somewhere inside, a sealed container held a single component needed to restore the ship's FTL drive. Retrieve the component, Sen said. Alive. Vance looked at the engine core. Then he looked at the women watching him. The keepers were praying. The seekers were hopping. The reclaimers were smiling. He stepped through the airlock. The engine core was a graveyard of failed repairs. Vance moved through corridors that had been twisted by heat and time. Radiation warnings flashed on his suit's display, but the levels were survivable. Barely. The real danger was the instability. Every step sent vibrations through the deck plates. Every vibration threatened to trigger a collapse. He found the first body after 5 minutes. A woman, reclaimer markings on her uniform. She had died trying to reach the component. A collapsed catwalk had crushed her lower body. Her face was frozen in an expression of determination, not pain. She had known the risk. Vance knelt beside her, closed her eyes, then kept moving. The second body was a keeper. She had died of radiation poisoning. Her hands were wrapped around a religious symbol that Vance didn't recognize. Her lips were parted in mid-prayer. He moved faster. The third body was different. No tribal markings, no uniform, just a skeleton in civilian clothes. Male. He had been dead for decades. His bones were scattered across the floor as if he had been running when the end came. Vance recognized the uniform, Deep Space Engineering Corps. This man had been part of the original crew. He had survived the pathogen. He had chosen to die here, alone, rather than risk infecting anyone else. The sealed container was ahead. Vance could see it through a gap in the wreckage, but the path was blocked by a collapsed section of the ceiling, too heavy to move, too unstable to go around. He looked at the walls, at the supports, at the way the pressure had distributed itself across the damaged structure. Then he smiled. Humans had been solving impossible problems for their entire existence. They had crossed oceans without maps. They had flown to the stars without knowing if they would find anything there. They had survived plagues, wars, and the death of their own homeworld. A collapsed ceiling wasn't going to stop him. He found a weak point in the floor, used his suit's cutting torch to widen it, dropped down into the maintenance crawlspace below, crawled through 50 meters of darkness, breathing recycled air and listening to the ship groan around him. When he emerged on the other side of the collapse, the container was waiting. He grabbed it, turned back, and saw Sen standing in the shadows. She wasn't wearing a suit. She wasn't wearing protective gear. She was just standing there, breathing the poisoned air, watching him with eyes that held no fear. "The radiation doesn't affect me," she said. "None of the women. It's part of the change, part of what we became when the men died." Vance held up the container. "I have what I came for." "Do you?" Sen stepped closer. "The trial was strength, but you didn't use strength. You used cleverness. You used persistence. You used the same qualities that the men used when they turned off their own life support. Those men saved your life. Those men made me an orphan." Sen's voice cracked, just for a moment. Then the mask returned. "The second trial is wisdom. Meet me in the hydroponics bay at midnight. Ship's time. Come alone." She turned and walked into the darkness. The hydroponics bay had been transformed. Sen had removed every plant, every nutrient tank, every piece of equipment. The vast chamber was empty except for a single table in the center. On the table lay a data slate. On the slate was a single file. The original order. The one that had sent the Vanguard to the planet. The one that had led to the discovery of the pathogen. The one that had been signed by a council administrator who had known the risks and sent them anyway. "You want wisdom," Sen said. "Here it is. We weren't lost. We were abandoned. The council knew about the pathogen before we left. They sent us anyway. They wanted to see what would happen." Vance picked up the data slate, scrolled through the file. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to understand." Sen's voice was soft now, almost gentle. "We didn't go mad. We didn't kill our men because we were broken. We killed them because they asked us to, because the alternative was worse. And now you're here offering to save us, and I need to know if you're smart enough to see the truth." "What truth?" "That there's nothing to save." Sen spread her arms. "We're not human anymore, not really. The pathogen changed us. We can't reproduce with males. We can't live on planets with normal gravity. We can't go back to Earth or any of the colonies. We're a new species, and the council knows it. That's why they never came looking." Vance set down the data slate, walked to the observation window, looked out at the stars. "You're wrong," he said. "Am I?" "You're not a new species. You're the same species that survived the Black Death, the same species that rebuilt civilization after nuclear fire, the same species that looked at the void between stars and said, 'We're going anyway.'" He turned to face her. "The pathogen didn't change who you are. It changed how you survive." Sen's mask cracked again, whiter this time. "The third trial," she whispered. "Hart, what's your answer?" Vance walked back to the table, picked up the data slate, smashed it against the floor. "My answer is this," he said. "The council sent you to die. They left you here to rot, but you didn't rot. You built something. 3 tribes, 247 women, 113 years of refusing to give up. That's not a new species. That's humanity at its most human." He extended his hand. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here to take you home. All of you, keepers, seekers, reclaimers. Every single woman who wants to see the sun again." Sen looked at his hand, looked at his face, looked at the shattered pieces of the data slate on the floor. Then she took it. Epilogue. The Council fleet arrived 3 days later. They found the Vanguard of Hope attached to a human shuttle, her engines online for the first time in a century. They found 247 women standing in the docking bay, their tribal markings washed away, their faces turned toward the future. And they found Commander Elias Vance standing at the front, his hand on the shoulder of a 6-year-old girl who had been born in the dark and would never have to die there. The council demanded answers. The women gave them one. A single word, repeated by every survivor in every language, until the fleet had no choice but to listen. Home.